We need those gifts back, wrapped, and under the tree by December the 14th. So youth group class, I made an announcement this morning. That will be changing. I'll get to you later. All right, need it wrapped and under the tree by December the 14th. So please go ahead and grab one this morning. Be a part of that. Here's the agreement that I will make with you this morning. Obviously, I have a cold. I know that some of you do as well. Here's what I will promise. I have a bottle of water. I will do my best not to keel over on you up here. But I need you to honor your end of the agreement, which is you will bring me back to life if I do. Is that a fair agreement? Okay. My apologies if I start hacking in the middle of it. It's just the nature of the beast at this point. Some of you know just as well as I do. So there's the introduction. And I also promise that I'm going to keep this as mellow and as monotone as possible, which you know is hard for me. But I don't wish to sound like a 13-year-old boy halfway through this. So I will try my best at that as well. We'll begin by reading in Matthew chapter 5 this morning, verses 43 through 48. This is where we'll be all morning, so you might as well turn and leave it there. Matthew 5, 43 through 48. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. There's a gentleman I have a tremendous amount of respect for, a guy named Karl Barth. Barth was a teacher. He taught students who wanted to be preachers, and there was a way that he taught that's been cut down and attributed to him as saying you preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, that your sermon should be culturally aware. I believe this morning's we're going to talk about gluttony. That just sailed over the top of some of you coming off Thanksgiving. It was a joke, I'm kidding. We are, however, going to be in that verse. We will be talking about loving those who stand against us. I don't have to sit and list off everything that has happened in our country and our world over the last, handful of days, months, years, for you to come up with a list of events that cause hurt, suffering, and pain in our world, do I? Unfortunately, all you have to do is crack open your newspaper, turn on your TV, or visit any number of our national or international news sources to see that our world exists with pain and suffering as a part of it. Just as a quick test case, I hopped on my favorite source of American news, the British Broadcasting Company. Thank you, BBC. Last night, and got a list of national and international headlines. And I very quickly, reading through those, saw that there is trouble in countries, in towns around our world because of some conflict that has existed in a town smaller than Altus called Ferguson, Missouri. And I saw that Egypt is in turmoil because the people who were supposed to be taking care of Hosni Mubarak, you remember that guy who killed a bunch of protesters in Egypt in 2011, they decided to drop charges against him. And I saw that there are countries in the middle of strife all throughout Africa because their people are starving. And the aid that we try to get to them ends up in the hands of those who then hold it over them or hold it away from them. I saw that in Atlanta, Georgia, a boy that's been missing for 4 years was found behind a false wall in his dad's house. They had taken him away from his mom and hidden him. When I was with a friend last week, I found out that there was a child that wandered off and went missing in Tulsa, just walked out the front door. That was Searcy, Arkansas. You've got your eyes and ears open. You know stories that I've not listed. If we go back a whole lot farther, we can start bringing in world events, too many to list off, amen, that result in the hurt and suffering of people, of God's children. I've directed my students a number of times to visit the Voice of the Martyrs website if we want it to hit a little closer to home. Christians who are in jail or being put to death around the world because they refuse to back away from their beliefs. I don't think it is unfair to say that we live in a world that very often is the valley of the shadow of death. I know that we are in a joyful, celebratory time of year. But there is also the need for us to remember that there is both light and dark in our world. In light of these recent events this morning, I'm going to tell you a story. You know how much I love stories at this point. I've been here just over a year. You've probably figured that out. It's a story about a guy who lived at a time of strife. This guy existed in a world where people stood starkly against each other. Very early on, there were people who began to listen to him as he called for the world to change, to be different. This describes a lot of stories at this point. I hope you're still with me. Because as he went on, the people in charge just kind of let it slide. You know, at some point this guy is going to get himself in trouble. He's going to say something that people don't like, or he's going to get caught up in some sort of scandal like everybody else that's been in his position before, and eventually the people will just stop following him. It's not quite what happened. Now, there were a couple times along the way that he said some things that were pretty unpopular, but those that quit following him were quickly replaced by new people who would. And over time, there were enough people who were threatened by what he was doing, by what he was saying, by how he was living, that they decided that it was time to get rid of him. This is, of course, the story of who? Jesus. I want to tell it that way because I want to make sure that you get the point that Jesus understood what it meant to have people dead set against him. From the time he opened his mouth and started teaching, and throughout the 3 years that he did it until the time that they killed him, there were people who went out of their way to make sure he was discredited. How many stories do we have of the Pharisees trying to set a trap for him? They went on a really long walk one time, a good 2 to 3 day journey, just to meet up with him so they could pose a question for him to try to spring it on him to get him in trouble. I promise they didn't walk 3 days to chastise his followers about not washing their hands before they ate grain. But they did it. Why? Because they hated him. Because they hated the power that he had. They hated that people followed him instead of them. I think that defines enemy, right? While the story at the time, if it was in our time, would have made great fodder for every tabloid and every conspiracy theorist, at his time, things just kind of went dormant for a while. The disciples hid out. We know the rest of the story. But let's also not forget that there is a moment where his enemies think they have won. Right? There's a moment where they think they've taken care of the problem. But at the very early part of his ministry, before a lot of those traps are set, we have his Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, 43 through 48 that we read a minute ago, we will read again. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. You have heard it said, that statement is not a direct quotation of Old Testament law. It is, however, a mode of operation, a way that things just kind of happened. We don't have those at all in our world, do we? There's not a set expectation for how people will do things. There's not a set cultural expectation for how we behave. There is no such thing as Black Friday. Mode of operation. For some reason, people stream out of their houses entirely too early in the morning. They go shopping. They throw punches. Not kidding. There was a great moment at Target a few years ago that I did not witness, but I was told about, where towels were on sale for $1. And a lady crawled across several people's carts, got in the cart with the towels, and started throwing them back to her husband with the cart. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to throw a towel or not. But does that really surprise anybody? Standard mode of operation. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. It's not a commandment from God, but it's how we expected people to behave. We understand that while we like to carry a different expectation for ourselves, we are also often tempted to slip to the culture's standard mode of operation, right? Where everything must be bigger, everything must be newer, everything must be better, and have the right labels, and look and be and exist a certain way. It's not a commandment from God, but it's a way that we want it, and so we pursue it. So here are these people listening to Jesus who have been told this their entire lives, that you love your neighbor, but you hate your enemy. And Jesus turns around and says, but I say, or but I tell you. I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Pray for those that persecute you so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's a big statement at the end, right? You want to be a child of God? This is what it looks like. That you love your enemy and you pray for those who persecute you. I don't know about you, but I'm not real good at that. If you try to hurt me, I'm not going to be all smiles and giggles about it. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be hurt. And in our culture, I'm probably going to try and get you back, get revenge. That sound familiar? So let's just pose a hypothetical. Let's just say that, okay, good, not in here, I can do this. Let's just say that Hunter's playing in the front yard. And, we've got a kid that was just found behind a wall in Georgia. Somebody runs by and picks him up and kidnaps him. And they take 4 years of my life with my son. I get him back. That's the story we're working on. They take 4 years. Are any of you going to be surprised when I haul off and deck the person who did it in the middle of the courtroom? Any of you going to think that that's just, that I got to do that? Any of you want to do the same thing? Okay. Cultural mode of operation. Not of God. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Mode of operation, way of God. We've gotten so mixed up that we've decided that a lot of times justice means getting even. And oftentimes in the Bible, justice is compared to mercy. But our cultural mode of operation says otherwise. I don't know about you, but I hear very often love your neighbors and hate your enemy. That's what we're told to do. And God says something different. God causes the sun to rise on the righteous and the unrighteous. Way back in the time of Noah, God looked down and saw a world that was not right. And while he could have just wiped the whole thing out and given up in disappointment, God chose to continue to exist and interact and be involved with a world that held both light and dark. How long was it after Noah gets the boat back on the ground before they start messing things up again? You're shaking your head. Not very long. Was God unaware that Noah was going to be a screw-up somewhere along the way? Was he surprised by his error? I don't really think so. God chooses to continue to act through people who have both good and evil in a world that creates both hope and pain. God chooses to continue to be involved. God chooses to have the sun rise on the righteous and the unrighteous. Now that may drive us nuts. I want the good guys to win and the bad guys to lose. Isn't that how every movie is supposed to go? That's how every story should be, and yet we know it's not. God's goal is for us to be continually people of mercy and forgiveness. That we will be the righteousness of God in a world that does not see it very often. And then there's this lovely little comparison to tax collectors and pagans. I don't like tax collectors any more than you do. But that culturally is a big deal. People who steal and take and make their lives better off the pain of others. You want a general, broad description of tax collector? There you go. Somebody who improves their life at the hand of somebody else's suffering. And God says this whole love your neighbors, hate your enemies thing, those who don't follow me do that. Those who cause hurt and suffering do that. If you do what they do, how are you any different? One of the struggles that we have had as the church has begun to look a lot like the culture. Christians are not people who look different in the world. Christians are people who show up at a specific building on a set time. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm saying that's what it's become. And we cannot continue to do that. If you remember back a few weeks to the last time I did this, there's a little quote from Richard Rohr: "The suffering on the world is too great for us to continue that mode of operation, that expectation of who we are." It's time that we Christians rise up to the expectation that God has for us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is way too easy for us to act like the culture, to want more, to want for ourselves instead of wanting for God's kingdom. Those are two fundamentally different things. And when I am able to set down what I want for myself, to sacrifice my dreams and my plans and my rights in order to improve the life of somebody else, to bring them closer to God, then not only have I done the right thing, but I've done something our culture has no longer expected from its Christians. That's where we need to head. I'm not going to tell you that in any of the things I listed off just now, I am perfect. I can't even pretend. I'm very much not. I'm not perfect at loving my enemy. I'm not perfect at loving those who cause hurt and pain. I'm pretty good at getting angry about it. I'm pretty good at wanting a cultural idea of justice. But it is my desire to be Christ-like, to further his kingdom on earth. I have a goal and a hope for myself. I do not wish to live looking at others through a lens of fear, through a lens of distrust, a lens of jealousy or of hatred, or any other number of views that what happens on this earth can cause me to take up. I want to live in a way that when I look at others, the only lens I have is one of love, one of mercy, one of compassion. Let's not pretend for a second that that's easy, but I think we can all acknowledge that that is right. I recognize that there is no reason on earth for me to live that way other than Jesus. And in the grand scheme of things, isn't that the most important reason to do anything? If my choice to look at people in the way that I feel we are called to look at them causes me, at some point, to be taken advantage of, to be hurt, to be killed, well then so be it. If because of it, somebody else gets an opportunity to know God. This morning, I have no happy ending for you. We don't get happy endings. We're going to walk out the doors, and we're going to go out the exits, and we're going to be in the same world we were in when we walked in the doors. We're going to be in a world where people riot in the streets. We're going to be in a world where justice prevails over mercy. We're going to be in a world where hurt exists on a scale way bigger than we give it credit for. We're going to be in a world that we look around at sometimes, and if you're anything like me, it's hard all the time to see that God wins. Sometimes it looks like Satan has control. That world is still there. In spite of the pain and hurt that exists, we as followers of Christ find ourselves in a position where we are called to react to those who do evil with love. There is no way around that. We are called to react to those who pursue pain for others with grace. And it is a hard thing, but it is a God thing. It is only out of our understanding of God that we can do that. And it is only in a Christian community where that is expected and we can be supported that I believe it is possible to live that way. There's a quote that I love, and I will admit the source of it makes me a little nerdy. Any of you Lord of the Rings fans? Oh, don't be ashamed of it. Hold those hands up high. I know some of you are not movie clip people, but others of you are. And I'm going to play a 2-minute and 18-second clip from the end of the second Lord of the Rings movie. There we go. You've got Frodo on the screen. Some of you may have never seen this before. That doesn't change what is about to be said. I'm going to sit down, listen to the truth that is being shared, and then we will finish out this morning.
I know. It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something. Even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam? That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
They look out and see a world that is full of death and destruction. Frodo says, "What are we doing here?" And Sam responds, I think, quite right. We shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be like this. But it is. This is where we are. This is where we are. We're in a world with both light and dark. We're in a world where there is good and evil, where there is joy and where there is pain. And as Christians, sometimes, I get it, the pain, it looks bigger. The struggle looks hard and not worth it. Sam says it right. I think I understand now why those stories meant so much. The folks in those stories had a lot of chances to turn back, to give up, only they didn't. They kept going. They kept going because they were holding on to something. Frodo says, what are we holding on to? Sam says that there is some good in this world and that it is worth fighting for. There is some good in this world and it is worth fighting for. We know that there is good in this world. We call that good God. And I think you will agree with me when I say that our faith is worth fighting for. That God's kingdom is worth fighting for. Amen? Thank you for participating in my nerdy moment this morning. I recommend you go watch the movie. Tolkien, very much a Christian, writes about the triumph of good over evil. And let us be reminded at the end of this that even though there is darkness, that ultimately good triumphs, that God wins. If you want to be a part of that battle, maybe you haven't become a Christian, followed God, and you want to be a part of fighting for good in a world that seems so dark, please come. We will support you in that this morning. If you are getting tired of fighting, there are more than one person in this room who understands. We will pray with you. We will support you. But let us be a family together this morning. Rally behind the needs of our people. If you need anything, come now as we stand and as we sing together.